What's up, guys? It's Jaythenticity, and I am happy to announce that for today's first interview, we have a special guest. His name is Gwydion Blackrose. He is a natural psychic and spiritual teacher who empowers people internationally to come more fully into alignment with their true core essence, their sensuality, and their wildness. This includes chakra readings, spiritual mentoring, and intuitive coaching, also offering online classes on empowerment and sharing his message through his blog, YouTube videos, and Facebook page. After studying tarot cards and various mystical traditions since he was 12 years old, Gwydion started teaching and reading cards professionally in 2012. He holds a university degree in gender studies and religious studies and has been an environmental and LGBT activist for most of his life. He loves spending time in nature, foraging, herbal medicine, and dancing. He's also employed as a youth worker and counselor at the local LGBT center and a certified completion process practitioner by Teal Swan. So these are a lot of things, and welcome. I'm glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. That will be fun, I'm sure.
Yeah. So yeah, we already talked about what we wanted to cover in today's interview, and so the main topics are gonna be gender identity and identity in general.
hmm
So my first question would be, what does identity as a whole and also masculinity and femininity mean to you, and how is it connected to both a person's physical sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation?
Okay, these are like several questions in
Yeah,
one.
that's a lot to start, I guess.
Yeah, let's start with identity. I think that it's important to understand that identity for me is very different from our actual self. So identity is more like a mask or like a persona that we kind of build while being socialized in the society. So most of us have come, into a society where we were taught that we are like male and female, for example. So we identify at some point as a man or woman, like most of us. And it's similar with all other like aspects of ourselves. It's similar with like religion or even identifying as an artist or like a computer tech guy. So a lot of the things that go into our identity aren't really or aren't necessarily part of our actual self or like our soul essence. So identity kind of is like, the clothes that you choose to wear because you feel comfortable in them or because other people expect you to wear them also. So identity is not always what we would like our identity to be, but sometimes is what we picked up because like our parents or siblings or friends, expected us to be a certain way in order to be acceptable and lovable and all of that.
Yeah.
And I think the important difference here between our identity, which I think we can also call our ego, and our actual self, is that the self usually is way more complex and usually includes aspects that we wouldn't see fit, belonging to us in terms of our identity. So a lot of, classically like straight, men usually, especially like when they're cisgender, they have this strong idea of what masculinity like should look like. And these ideas usually don't originate with them specifically, but are what they pick up from society. So from their parents, especially the father, also like the mother, and what movies show and all of that. So they might very strongly, because, they have been taught that they are, men or are supposed to be men, so they will probably very strongly identify with these aspects, which are considered to be male by, society, like being very rational and very practical and very, more rough, not overly emotional, stuff like that. And the issue is that their actual selves, their soul essence, might include other aspects which are very sensitive, for example. because let's face it, we're human beings. All of us are sensitive, all of us are emotional. It's part of what makes us human to begin with. But when you are raised as a man, specifically in the Western society, there's this idea that these aspects are wrong, so we push them into what some call the shadow of our self. The things that we kind of suppress and deny, and which are then hiding in the dark. And our identity might be completely in opposition to these things, which we pushed into the shadow, but our self actually includes all of these aspects. And when it comes to gender, to what society tells us is, male and female in terms of how to behave and how to dress and all of these things, I find that most human beings actually have all the aspects, or most of the aspects, like of the opposite sex, inside of them in their shadow. So it's the suppressed part of them, because in our Western society we have learned that gender functions, very binary, in binary terms. So, man has to be like strong and rational, and on the other end of the scale there's, woman who is like weak and emotional and maybe more intuitive. So usually male and female are very polarized, and when we are men, and like most people around us see us as men also, we kind of expect ourselves and are expected to fit into this, neat little box, and suppress all the other aspects which are considered to be female or feminine. But what we will find when we kind of break free of these stereotypical like gender roles a little bit, we will find that a lot of these aspects which are like female are present in men, the same way that a lot of these aspects that are considered to be more masculine are present in women. Because like human beings aren't that, divided as sometimes people think they are, because of the biological sex that we are born with.
That reminds me of like when we're talking about that, about the the yin yang sign, where you have the yang, but there's also like a little bit of yin in it, and vice versa. So, do you think it would be possible to like embody all of the aspects, masculine and feminine, or is it like you embrace one side and the other side gets suppressed, or maybe just temporarily, and then you express the other side and the first side gets suppressed, if that makes sense?
Yes. Mm. Yeah, it's the thing, like everything is possible. The thing is, usually, okay, so when we talk about like the female and male side, the way that I see it, what we're actually talking about is like human sexual energy, and there's like male sexual energy and female sexual energy. Because like when we don't talk about sex and like make masculinity or femininity about anything else, I think it becomes really complicated, because even when we look at the human body, all of us have eyes, and a nose and ears, and those are not like male or female.
True.
So most of what makes up the human being is actually not male or female. The only difference between these two sexes is the sexual energy, which physically expresses itself in most human beings as like, ovaries or testicles and semen and the egg and all of that. So
yeah.
That said, I do believe that it's completely possible to express and embody both sides of this kind of spectrum. But also what we find once we are in a place that we can embrace our like male sexual and female sexual energies, or how they manifest, we find that something emerges. We can think of it as, when human male and the human female come together and, you know, have sex, then there's a chance that, you know, a baby is born. And the one reason why that even is possible is because the male and female human sexual energies, once they combine, they give naturally birth to like a third quality. A third quality which is actually very present in most queer people that I know. So yeah, essentially like everyone in the LSBTQI whatever spectrum.
Yeah.
Which is not to say that this kind of energy isn't present in like straight people, but usually because of queer people are more allowed to embrace different aspects of their, you know, gender expression or different aspects of their sexual energy way more easily because they have failed already. You know, they've failed at being like the typically like straight cisgendered person, so they can kind of come up with their own stuff. And yeah, so what happens usually when people embrace and are at peace with their male and female sexual energies and how these manifest, what we see is that the energies kind of mix with each other, and it is like no longer, you know, when you look at the color purple or violet, you can combine the colors red and blue in order to get this color.
Yeah.
It has unique properties. Like you could look at red, these have very distinct qualities, and when you combine those, the purple that results has still some qualities that are like blue and are like red, but they're also their very own thing. So what I like to call like queer sexual energy, because most queer people strongly embody it, is a combination of both, but it's also more because there's so much freedom in expression. While the way that I perceive as male sexual energy is more kind of moves more like lightning and is very straight and direct, and like female sexual energy is more like wave-like or moves more in circular patterns. And when both of those combine, you have like chaos in the most fertile sense of the word. And there are all these kinds of like shapes and textures and qualities that now open up to you because you're no longer limited by just expressing one or the other. That said, you can obviously choose to be more in like the male sexual energy at one point, you know, during your life or during your day, and in female sexual energy at another time. So there's always flow in these categories. It's never fixed. You are never limited unless you limit yourself.
Yeah. So, why do you think that a lot of people feel more, let's say, drawn or embody more of one side? And how can people embrace more of, like, if they let society tell them what they should be, how can they embrace more of their natural energy?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that there does not need to be like any balance. Usually we have this kind of idea, especially like in the more new age spiritual, you know, communities, that there needs to be a balance between like male and female and, you know, yin and yang and stuff like that, which is kind of ironic because when you actually study the Chinese philosophy, you will find that when there's a perfect balance between like yin and yang, that equals death, because then there's no movement. Because that's like the whole essence of the yin and the yang symbol, is that everything is in flow constantly. It's like not a static state. It's constantly like one is evolving into the other, and then, you know, the circle continues.
Yeah.
So it can actually be, and it is for some people, true that what society shows or, you know, portrays as like male behavior and male clothing and the male sexual energy that you embody like is your thing. So there's no necessity for a person to embody male and female and queer like sexual energy.
Yeah.
So if that is actually what makes someone happy, you know, what makes them feel excited and at peace with themselves, that's, you know, totally cool. Like there is no necessity to break out of social stereotypes or like expectations if you generally actually enjoy these, you know, categories or this style of, you know, clothing and behavior. That said, for most people, as you mentioned as well, it's not necessarily like natural to limit yourself, and most people will find it beneficial to like open up more to things that they perceive as like feminine, or, you know, if they're like male or the other way around. And I feel like when you start questioning your own gender expression or what actually is part of who you are as opposed to just your like gender or sex, I feel like there are different ways to go about that process, and it highly depends on the person. So if you are a very mental person, I would definitely encourage people to do some research about what is considered male and female, or masculine and feminine, across time and space, essentially. Look at different cultures, study different cultures and also religions, and how they portray like male and female like behavior and aspects. And also look back into throughout history and see how what is considered male and female is constantly evolving and changing, because this will help you get an understanding that 99% of what we consider to be like female or male, and like especially like feminine, masculine, is just a cultural construct, essentially. It's just an idea of what divides us, and it's not actually grounded in the real like physical foundations or like even energetic foundations of what differentiates us. So there's a lot to be learned that way. And you know, as you mentioned like earlier in my description, like I have studied gender studies and also looked into like ethnological studies and all of that. So there's a lot of material out there if you actually start researching it about gender, but also about sexuality and how different cultures, places, in different times, there was, you know, there are completely different ideas and concepts out there that have nothing to do with modern ideas about gender. So this is, I feel this is always like for the rational minded person or someone who really, you know, likes to read and to study up on things, that's a great way to go about that. Another way, which I usually love and recommend, is to work with the body. And one way that I think is helpful is to use dance and physical expression. So yeah, okay, so there are like two different ways to go about that. One way is, as I said, like male sexual energy is usually more, you know, straightforward and moves more like lightning. So if you want to feel more into that aspect of you that resonates with this quality or that expresses this quality, you can actually start moving like that to get a sense of what happens. And actually, it's kind of cliche, but like hip movement that is essentially force and back, like, you know, like you would imagine someone having sex, you know, in a male body, that actually raises your male sexual energy regardless of your physical body type. So doing that kind of thing increases your male sexual energy, and there are actually like studies that show that it also increases your testosterone to do this kind of hip movements, which, yeah, I find is yeah, I like it when official studies kind of catch up with what I'm getting intuitively, so I can feel good about that aspect. And in a similar way, if you want to tune into more with your female sexual energy, a great way to do that is actually to start practicing belly dance movements, which are a lot about, you know, getting the hips moving, which is a good thing in general because your hip area, obviously, and like your sex is where all your sexual energy is kind of concentrated. So getting that area moving is always a good thing. And doing it in this circular fashion that you usually do during belly dancing will help you get more in tune and increase your female sexual energy. So kind of experimenting with both separately to get a feeling for how it feels to move that way and what it does with you will usually, like, on the one hand help you to get actually like a sense of what I'm talking about, and on the other hand it will already start bringing up issues inside you, like that you will be confronted with all your conditioning about like how you should move, which is kind of ridiculous if we think about it. Like, it's your body, you can move it any way you want, but at the same time we restrict ourselves so much because of all the ways that we are taught that, you know, men should move or women should move, and you know, and that we have to have like a clear distinction between genders and like stuff like that. So this will already bring up a lot of things to process and to work with doing that. Another thing when you love dancing, another thing really is just liberate your body in general, like really play with each different part of your body in the way like your feet, like really take the time while dancing and move like your right foot and see how it can move, how it wants to move, like get to know your own body. This is not specifically like about exploring male and female sexual energy, but this is essentially about reclaiming your own body, owning your own body, and getting a sense of, you know, I'm actually free to move any way that I want. And maybe, you know, let's figure out how my right shoulder would, you know, would want to move, or like if I'm moving centered in like my left ear, how would my head move then? So just getting out of your head and out of the control of your ego and identity essentially, and more feeling into your body and getting a sense of how your body wants to move. Because this is, you know, what will help you overcome the restrictions that you place upon yourself, and overcoming any restriction really will always increase the kind of life force flowing through you, including your sexual energy.
I love that. Yeah, that's what I was just thinking about, and I'd like to know your perspective on that. Is it that actually everybody has access to both masculine and feminine sexual energy all the time, but just like maybe be predisposed to express one more, but ultimately can choose to express both by like using their body to like kind of channel that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is where we have to kind of come back to like biology, and I want to acknowledge first that the whole idea of, you know, a male and a female body already has a lot of like cultural projections and judgments that go into that. So we are actually not at a point in our like evolution where we can look at our own body from like a place that is more objective, because we already have all these assumptions about how our body like should look and what it's called and stuff like that. And that said, just, you know, working with the terms that we currently have, when humans are born with testicles and everything that goes into what we would usually consider a male sex, like a male body, the potential for embodying and expressing male sexual energy usually is bigger. And this is the case because, okay, when we manifest physically, in order to do that, there already needs to be like an energetic blueprint present. So the way that I experience the world, at least, there is essentially like an some call it astral or etheric kind of blueprint or structure present that then kind of attracts the physical components that then form the body. So someone who already like presents himself like physically as male already has to have access to a lot of male sexual energy, because otherwise the physical structures wouldn't even form. It's the same way that someone who is born with ovaries and who has what we would currently consider a female body has to have more access potentially to female sexual energy, and this like trend stays true during their whole life. That said, most people don't tap into like their sexual energies at all, because we are in very sexually suppressed cultures, and a lot of trans men actually like embody way more male sexual energy than the usual like cis guy would walking down the street, which I think is important to understand. So when I acknowledge that there's different potentials based on the physical body type, and like what we would consider people with a male body has usually more access potentially to male sexual energies, it doesn't mean that other people can't access it, or it also doesn't mean that like cisgendered people or like biological men, if we want to call that, actually express in the body a lot of male sexual energy. So there's a huge difference between the potential of expressing something and the reality of it. So yeah, where am I going with this? Okay, so that said, as I said, like everybody has access. Let's say 99% of human beings have access to like male and female sexual energy, and also like to what I call queer sexual energy, because it's part of what makes us humans. And one way to understand that, which I think is easier for the rational mind, is to understand that even physically, most of our bodies produce like testosterone and also estrogens. So all of our bodies, even physically, already run on like male and female sexual energy, or in these cases, sexual hormones. So this also means, and this is a sign that all of us have the access point, or like the possibility to access like male and female sexual energy as well, because when there's like physical expression present, it always means that there needs to be like an energetic blueprint behind it that actually like makes it possible for that thing to be physically present. Does that answer your question? I feel like there was another layer that I haven't touched upon yet.
No, it did. It did.
Okay.
Yeah, I was having another question about like when it would be more beneficial to look at life like through the lens of gender, and when it would be better to like kind of just scrap that and just go with like what you personally think is best for you. But I think that what you talked about a moment ago is like just discerning between if you already feel comfortable with how you express, or if you feel there's something like constricted or something that's like suppressed. Would you agree with it, or what would you elaborate on that?
Okay, so first of all, a lot of us don't really know that we are suppressing an aspect of ourselves until we know. So a lot of this whole suppression process really pushes aspects of ourselves so deep into our subconscious that we have no conscious awareness of it at all. Usually because we have learned in the very first years of our life, here on Earth in our physical body, that certain aspects of ourselves were wrong and needed to be suppressed, or otherwise we would be punished.
Yeah.
So a lot of us will not consciously be aware of how much they restrict themselves. So I think it's always a good thing to question that, or to explore things. I think it's really helpful to understand that, you can explore your male and your female sexual energies, and then figure out that you are actually happy with just expressing the kind of energy or the kind of behavior that you're currently already doing. So there's never harm in exploring. Because if you don't like something, or something doesn't feel good to do or to express, you never have to do it again. But then you will do it consciously, because you know that something is true for you and that something else isn't. So exploring and the whole process of getting to know different aspects of yourself and seeing how different, also different identities or personas fit you or might work for you, is always beneficial. Yeah, so that's about that. About the first aspect of the first part of your question, I think it's really tricky, because if we wouldn't live in human society, then I would say scratch that gender, scratch the whole idea that there is such a big difference between how men and women see the world. Just be true to who you are, and explore the world on your own terms, and know your body, know who you are and what you like and what you don't like. But don't limit yourself by any identity unless you really want to. That said, the issue is that we do live in society where, especially in the West and at the present time, we have this strong idea that there's men and women, walking this earth, and that we can tell whether someone is male or female based on the body and all of that. So a lot of us are raised with the assumption, first of all, that there are different categories within, the human species that are male and female, and also that different behaviors are attached to that. So if someone is born with, let's say, female genitalia, most people will assume that this person is female and will always identify as female. And also we will assume that all the feminine traits that are currently considered to be feminine by, our society and movies and religions and all of that, will somehow express themselves in that little person, which, will be started, we will start to call that baby a girl, and it will identify itself as a girl in the beginning, probably. And yeah, if everything goes as planned, given societal ideas, this girl will be a woman and maybe have children or not, whatever. So during this whole process, we are not safe from being influenced, and we are not isolated. So there are actually studies that show that even quickly after birth, female babies and male babies are treated completely differently. Male babies will be fed more than female babies, and female babies will be held tighter than male babies. So all these assumptions about that the boy needs to grow strong and become big and therefore is fed more, or the girl is fragile and therefore needs to be held tighter, all of this is already subconsciously going into how we behave towards them, and all of that will influence how we experience ourselves and see ourselves and how we see the world and behave in the world. So because we are brought up in a society in which most of us identify as male and female and men and women, I think it's really necessary for us to really explore what that means and which assumptions go into that, because we could potentially choose to like deconstruct our identity to such a degree that we no longer identify as male and female, for example. But this is not what most people want. Let's be honest. And it's not even necessary for most people. So what I have found is way easier for people, and which is something that I, also do in like my online workshops, for example, especially in Wild Man Rising. I think that's a good example, actually. Wild Man Rising is my like training program for men, cis men, trans men, I don't care, in which we partially, awake the whole body, liberate the body, reconnect to what is wild inside of us, but also in which we explore what we have learned about being male and being a man in today's society, and how that actually is in alignment with who we are and how it isn't in alignment, and how we have been traumatized by these like stereotypes and expectations, and how we also have benefited by them. So I think when we already have this strong identity as one gender or the other, it can be really beneficial, like to have a space in which we can look at, our own gender and reflect upon that gender and how it fits us. And then we can kind of evolve our definitions of what it means to be a man in order to actually be more in alignment with who we actually are, with ourselves. Yeah, and another thing is that because we are raised a certain way, it's easiest to explain that looking at women. Currently in the Western society, every fourth woman will be sexually assaulted or molested or raped before she turns 18. Like, this is 25% of women in Western society. This is like a lot. And and the thing is that people are treated differently and looked at differently because of their gender. And likewise, they will also have similar experiences because of their gender. So having spaces, which are like all women spaces or all male spaces, or spaces which are exclusively like for trans people or for only for gay men or for lesbians or whatever, or like also, groups for just black people and stuff like that, can really be helpful in exploring an identity, because you will notice how similar our stories actually are, how similar our experiences are, not because in our essence we are all the same, but because the way that we were raised and the way that we are treated by society is so similar. So yes, it can also help us tap into, for example, when you have like an all group of men, it can definitely help you tap into what some call the divine masculine, or what I would call like male sexual energy, because essentially because of the close physical proximity, like you resonate with each other and strengthen these aspects inside you which are like. So what is similar will be strengthened and empowered. But at the same time, you will get to know a lot of similarities between everyone in the group, which have nothing to do with the actual physical body, but have everything to do with how society like treats them and how they were brought up.
Oh yeah.
So it's kind of, it can be really tricky, and I think this is actually where a lot of like female empowering like groups or male empowerment groups can go wrong really quickly if people are not able to differentiate between what is actually a specific quality that expresses itself, which is like part of the core essence, like for example in a male group like male sexual energy, or stuff like that, and which aspects have nothing to do with the actual like body or the actual self of a person, but the social constructs and ideas of gender that go into that. And yeah, I mean, like a lot of us actually, if we're honest, have no idea what is actually generally like part of us and which like originates from our physical body and which is just an idea that was planted in our head so much and like, you know, repetitively that we are no longer able to even, yeah, be aware of the fact that it's an idea and not a fact. So yeah, so it's really understandable, you know, that in a lot of cases, and especially in groups, people have issues with differentiating that as well, like what is generally like based in the body or the energetic blueprint of like men or women or whatever, and what is just a social construct. But this is where it's so necessary to really, you know, learn about these things and reflect upon these things, because otherwise we will just have groups that reinforce like stereotypes, gender stereotypes, which usually are very sexist and not in our best interest if we really want to be like free, self-possessed, like self-expressive beings.
It's so interesting. I never thought about it that way. So, do you think that might, like, let's say a lot of people, or it's already happening, but a lot more people will start questioning their gender identity and what really belongs to them and what was just because of upbringing? Do you think people will first need to go through like a period of confusion? Because that's what I feel, um, or what I'm in at the moment is like the more I question, the more confused I get.
Yeah, yeah, I think confusion for almost everyone is a big part of it, because one reason why we have like identities to begin with is because they are these like neat little boxes, which make it easy for us to identify like who we are and, you know, what is ours and what is not ours, who the other people are, you know. And the ego loves dividing everything, including like dividing people. So when we identify with a certain gender and also with a certain sexuality, it sets us apart from other people. And our ego really likes that because it strengthens its sense of self, its sense of like the personality that we want to be or think we should be. And in the moment that these like neat little boxes are like opened up, or the clear cut boundaries of these different categories start to blur, our ego completely goes, you know, insane because that's not what it wants. Our ego wants to feel safe and just learn that in order to be safe, it has to fit in those boxes, because most of us were punished when we weren't fitting into the boxes, not just of, you know, a gender, but also, you know, it is similar when it comes to like religion or what a good person would do and what a bad person would do. Obviously, all of us want to be good, because if we weren't good as children, we would be punished, like most of us. And it's similar with gender. Like if you are a boy and you start behaving in a way that is not considered to be like how boys should behave, you will be probably be punished by your parents. You will be bullied in school. Some other kids might start beating you up. Um, all of that. So in order to stay safe, our ego kind of is the force that keeps us so limited and restricted, because that's how we can safely function in a society that expects these clear distinctions between like everything. So once we start opening those boxes and really exploring what is inside and what these boxes mean, and if we actually like the labels that we put on those boxes and the stuff that we put into those boxes, and we kind of start making a mess of all of it, our ego will be really scared, essentially, because we have experienced that kind of pressure that forced us to identify with just one thing and to limit ourselves in a specific way to begin with. I mean, it's the same with race and racism. So children don't think in terms of a race, but their parents and the police will start thinking of them as a specific race. So if you don't behave in a certain way, or if you do stuff that other people like of a different race would do, usually someone will come around and like inform you that you're putting yourself in danger, or that it's inappropriate or whatever. So yeah, all these categories give us a lot of safety, but only to the ego, and it's really superficial, this sort of safety, because the only way that this whole like system works is because of all the other aspects of ourselves which are like suppressed and denied and kind of are imprisoned. It's like the ego is actually like a prison guard, constantly like pushing all the other aspects of ourselves like into our subconscious, where those other aspects usually end up really like frustrated and angry and sad because like it's like small children. If you constantly like send them into their room or like into the basement, like who would stay happy that way? So yeah, it makes sense that there's a lot of confusion, but I also think that this confusion has a lot to do with the way that our ego has been taught also like to feel safe. And once we start really getting a better sense of what we actually want, what we actually, like how we want to express ourselves, we give our ego something new to like attach to, and it will feel like safer again, because then it will kind of make your own box, which will help it. But also, yeah, like surround yourself with people who are also like out of the box, like thinkers and actors, and show behavior that is not so much restricted, because like we are a social species, we want to belong. And another thing that all these like categories do for us is that we have a place to belong. We can identify with a certain gender or sexuality, and this also means belonging to a certain like place, specific clubs, specific events, specific deodorants, like cosmetic products. So it gives us a place to belong, and once we open up these boxes, we no longer belong anywhere. Obviously that is confusing. So surrounding ourselves with people who are also out of the box thinkers, or who don't express the dominant stereotypes of the culture is really helpful, because then we have our own like group to belong. Maybe we're like the weird kids or the weird adults or whatever, but this will also help us feel more safe, and will help put the parts of ourselves at ease that are starting to panic once we break free from all these like boxes, which are more like prison cells.
Did you also find that like in your work in the LGBTQI center,
Mm-hmm.
did you find that especially the kids, when they are around like-minded people, that they will heal a lot faster?
Yes, hell yes. Um, yeah, like the thing is, when you're like queer in whatever way in our current society, you never fit. You're never really belong. So being in a group where you do belong, and where you are also free to express yourself the way that feels good to you to express yourself, this is such a profound like source of healing. because you like, I mean, I guess it kind of depends on the group, because like in some groups and some places there's still like a lot of other stereotypes at work, because there's like the gay stereotype, like how you should behave as a gay man or how you should behave as a trans woman or whatever. So that can be tricky as well, because that's again when like identities and the ego get in the way. But where I'm working in a lot of other places, there's this kind of freedom that allows everyone to experiment with themselves. Like they can choose the name that they want to be called with. They can choose, how they want to dress, if they want to wear like female or male clothes, even if they want to be addressed as male or female, or if they want to be addressed in a like gender neutral way. Because we also have like some people who are like gender queer, non-binary, trans people. Um, and they definitely do feel more at peace with themselves, because now they finally like have a place to belong, and also a place where there isn't this constant amount of pressure and stress that goes along with being different in our society, and the stress that goes along with being a minority in general. It's actually called like minority stress, and I would really like more people to look up the term, because minority stress is essentially the understanding that once you are a minority, your general the general amount of stress that you like suffer from is automatically way higher.
Mm.
Because like let's imagine like being a gay kid, you always have to check yourself how you present yourself, because you don't want to be bullied, you don't want to be beaten up, you don't want to be punished. So you are constantly checking yourself, am I acting straight enough? Do I look, if it's a gay boy, like do I look like boyish enough, masculine enough? Do I speak the right way? Does my voice sound correct? And all of these things. So if you are part of a minority, and let's imagine there's a regular like straight white cisgender person, they don't have that amount of stress, because they were never taught that how they are can potentially be dangerous. So they are never taught to suppress themselves so much. I mean, they are taught to suppress themselves in other ways, but they never have this amount of fear and this amount of stress going on all the time. So once you are in a space, for example, like if you're a queer person, like in an LGBT center, ideally, in a cool center where there's actually like space for self-exploration, self-expression, out of a sudden all the stress just fades away. And a lot of like mental diseases like depression and PTSD and eating disorders and all of these things are a result of this huge amount of stress, combined with some more like childhood trauma usually. But once you take away the stress, so much healing already starts to happen, simply because you can be yourself, and because the additional stress is fading or is no longer present. You can actually look at what do I like, what don't I like, what needs to change in my life in order to maybe address medication or my self-harm behavior or whatever. So a lot of healing already takes place by removing the stress and creating this place where everyone's free to be themselves. And also, as a second layer, it is just a great opportunity for actually being able to self-reflect, being able to figuring out who you are and what you want, because you are not in fight or flight mode all the time, essentially.
And so, other than that, other than like having people like yourself around you, what have you found are the most important things for people in the LGBT community? Yeah, to how do you say that? Um, to maintain or get to uh, a good emotional, mental, and physical health?
I think that besides surrounding yourself with more people who are like you, it's really important to examine your own, essentially your own self-hate and your own self-rejection, because nobody of us can grow up within like a homophobic and a transphobic society without adopting some, if not like all, but at least some of the assumptions and the prejudice going along with that. So usually there you will find when you start exploring, whether or not some of the like homophobic or transphobic like stereotypes, if you explore them and see what are people saying about me, you will usually find that some of the things that other people are saying about you actually got absorbed into yourself, and a part of you is saying all these things to yourself all the time, which is also like an additional route for stress and also for self-hate and the whole like self-harming behavior that goes along with it. So I don't think that everybody has to do like psychotherapy, but if you feel any call to do that, I think a lot of people will definitely benefit from it, in helping them exploring how their own, how they internalize the homophobia and the transphobia and also like the racism and all the other like issues in society inside themselves, similar to the whole like sexism that is going on. Like, like every woman should explore sexism, and also every man should explore sexism and how they absorbed all these like beliefs about how women are like inferior, or like how men are always have to be like tough and not express emotions, how all of that is still like stored inside of you. But yeah, you don't have to do psychotherapy, but I think for a lot of people, psychotherapy or like other forms of coaching will be really beneficial in order to like discover and unpack what is inside of them. But there are also like a lot of different like tools for self-reflection that will be helpful. I think the most important thing really is to be aware that there might be an issue, and then do some journaling, some trance work or guided meditations, whatever, to explore these different aspects of yourself, and to explore whether or not you are still carrying prejudices and like homophobia and transphobia specifically inside yourself, which are actually harming you. Because what will happen is that we are not making self-loving decisions when we still have so many beliefs inside of us which actually like tell us that we are wrong or evil or demonic, or that we will never find love or whatever. We will not start behaving in actually like self-loving, self-nourishing ways until we address all of that. And I feel like, even when I look around the LGBTQ like community as a whole, one of the reasons why traditionally, one of the stereotypes of gay male culture specifically is that there's a lot of alcohol and a lot of drugs and, cocktails and all of that. And why are people drinking so much alcohol? I mean, like, part of it is that as a society, we have an issue with alcohol, using it to deal with problems. And instead, yeah, alcohol is never a solution, but partially people are doing that, or doing like unprotected sex and stuff like that, because they're not really loving themselves, not really respecting themselves. And like, I don't blame anyone. Like, if someone has like a drug addiction or alcohol addiction, even porn addiction, or has any form of like self-cutting or whatever self-harming behavior, I don't blame like anyone. Like, everyone has very valid reasons for these behaviors, but I think it's really important that people start exploring where these things are coming from, and especially when we look at our like LGBT community, we deserve so much better. And I think we have to start exploring how our community works is still reflecting self-hate, and how we can change that inside ourselves and also like in the groups and the places that we visit to create spaces that are truly like inclusive and self-loving, and yeah, supporting us in just being ourselves.
Mm, great. So another thing I was thinking of was like when you are part of mm, when you're not a minority,
Mhm.
let's say you're white or you're a man or you're straight, how can you use that to help the minorities?
Okay, so first of all, I think almost everyone alive on Earth right now is part of some kind of minority. So,
Yes, true. True.
because it's like, I think it's a myth that there's like the ruling class, or you know, the stereotypical like straight white cisgender Christian able-bodied person. Like there will be some people who are really part of like no minority, but even when we look at age, you know, like children are in certain circumstances like the minority and are not really supportive. Um, or like old people, like, you know, kind of figure out where you are privileged. I think is a really good way for all of us to look at things, but especially those people who are thinking that they are never suppressed or like discriminated against at all. Figure out where you are privileged and where you aren't. And in the areas where you are privileged, use your privilege to support the voices and the opinions and the experiences of the people that are less privileged than you, that are minorities in that regard. So like, yes, straight people, you know, should be allies um, for LGBT people in general. Um, the same way that, you know, if you are Christian and that's cool, but you're like, you should inform yourself and like give voice to, and not give voice to, but strengthen the voices of like your Muslim or your, you know, pagan or your Yazidi or Buddhist or whatever, like neighbors.
Yeah.
So essentially use your privilege, the by which I essentially privilege is like, who do you listen to usually? Like when a white male, and it's kind of ironic me saying that, but yeah, like when I say something and there's like um a woman next to me and maybe she's like Muslim and like looking not, you know, not of a white skin color or whatever, usually people will trust my word more than hers, unless I, you know, tell them that, you know, she has actually a point, like take her seriously. So
Mm,
um I would wish that more people would do that, really making an effort to find the people who are given less airtime, you know, who are given less space in TV shows and movies and documentaries. Try to find people who have a different perspective, like from you and also like from mainstream society, because usually these outside perspectives are really valuable and will give you a lot of insight into like yourself and how the world works, that people were really like in a lot of ways part of mainstream society or the majority. They don't even have access to certain kinds of knowledge because they're so in the center of it all. You know, the same way that a lot of LGBT people, because we are kind of we failed at being like real men and real women in a way, you know, because we are not straight or we are not, you know, cisgendered and stuff. Because of that, we always have this outside perspective, which then enables us to actually like look at gender and look at the, you know, men and women in our lives, and to see how the gender dynamics are working. You know, it's like a stereotype of, for a lot of women, having the gay best friend who will help them, you know, understand men, or the gay best friend helping a guy to understand women. The only reason why we can like do that is not because we have like special superpowers, but because we are like outside and looking on like mainstream society or like the straight world, like from an external perspective. And the same is true for everything. Like a disabled person will be able to tell us a lot of things about, you know, how the body functions, or how our society is built around certain expectations when it comes to productivity, and how the body should move and all of that. And we'll have a lot of knowledge that, you know, people with a who are able-bodied will not have access to. So look for those voices, and, you know, like when you make interviews, for example, like see if you can find people who are not like you, like yourself, especially who are like less privileged than you are, and like help them get an audience. But like, even if you don't have like a YouTube channel or whatever, you can always make an effort to actually read like books that are written by people who are less privileged than you. And it's not even just like, it doesn't have to be books about society, or like, you know, it doesn't have to be academic books. It can be just novels. But you will notice that novels written, for example, like by like by Black people, will have a different flavor, different insight, and also different topics than books written by white people. Or, you know, same way that a TV show or like a movie that is written and that is produced, you know, by LGBT people will naturally have a different view on gender and sexuality and how society works than a movie that is, you know, written and directed by mainstream people who are not outside in any way. So having the outsider perspective can be really beneficial, but as I said, like almost every one of us is part of some form of minority. And, you know, 90% of us might be the majority, but there are usually still these aspects of us that are other. And I think acknowledging how we ourselves are others really can be a great source of strength. Because, as I said, the outside perspective is so valuable. And will also, you know, help with the guilt, because a lot of people, like in mainstream society, have a lot of guilt, like white people guilt, or I don't know. I'm not sure that most straight people are aware enough to feel guilty, but yeah. And so in the moment that you acknowledge, well, I am privileged in some ways and I'm not privileged in other ways, and that's actually true for like all of humanity, so we can support each other, you again, you know, open up your box. You are not thinking, well, I'm the I don't know, like in my case, like I'm the gay kid, I'm like not privileged because, you know, I'm gay, or because I don't know, like my gender identity, or whatever, my religion, I'm not the mainstream. I mean, that's true, like my form of religion and my sexuality aren't privileged in this society, but at the same time, I'm sort of able-bodied and I'm white and male, so I have a lot of privilege going for me as well. But because, you know, because I'm aware of how I'm privileged and how I am not privileged, I can, you know, look at you, or look at every other person and see, well, they might seem more privileged than I am, but maybe there are aspects of them that also aren't privileged. So it's more a sense of like brotherhood or sisterhood, like seeing the other as similar as opposed to, being different from us.
Hmm.
And yeah, and like it's the only way
Yeah,
for
no,
us actually to have conversation, when we see the other person as similar and not as like different or in opposition.
yeah, or like using the parts who are where you're privileged in to like inform people about maybe other less privileged people or about the parts of you that are less privileged.
Hmm.
I think that can be a doorway to more understanding.
Yes, and I think it's also the foundation of empathy. Like we can't really have compassion or empathy with someone who we see as, less privileged or a minority. We can't really understand them or relate to them unless we see how we are ourselves, like limited or like suppressed by society. It might be
Yeah.
to a different degree, but the experience is always very similar.
Hmm. Cool. So, um, another question that would be like in a different direction,
I think.
but also connected to identity is that on your website
Mhm.
you wrote that you always felt really connected to nature, and I was wondering how nature can help a person to express more of like their higher self, and how you found that being in nature and connecting to nature helped you in that way.
Okay, where do I start with this? I feel like, yeah, I feel like the foundational understanding that we need to have is that we are animals, like human beings are an animal species. So yes, we have like our beautiful minds and our whole like mental perception of everything. But at the root of our being, we are also animals. We are driven by the same needs and instincts as all the other animals. And we have similar emotions to all the other animals as well. So connecting with nature also always, connecting with the nature outside of us is also part of connecting with the nature inside of us. It strengthens and nourishes the part of us that is wild and that will always be wild. And our true authentic self, or what I think you would call, your higher self, is always connected to that as well. So connecting with nature kind of is a doorway from a more like mental, civilized place into the wholeness of who we are. Like wildness as a gateway towards a higher self, towards a true, authentic self-expression. Um, because that's the whole point about, behind like rewilding yourself, or what some people would call rewilding yourself, is essentially getting out of your head a little bit. Because like in your head, in your mind, you have your identity, which is very strict. And as we talked about earlier, it's this neat tiny little box. And when we connect with nature, things get more messy, essentially, because nature is always evolving, expressing itself, and it's kind of chaotic. Like there's a structure to it, but it's also always growing, evolving, changing. Like nothing is really static in nature. So connecting with nature also connects us with this like flow of energy. So it's not just awakening and strengthening like the wild parts inside of us, but it is also allowing these powers of change and creation to flow through us and to inform ourselves. Um, in terms of identity, I feel like because nature is such a great doorway towards our actual true core essence, because it removes us out of, being in nature, going into a forest, the wilder the place, the better, is even physically taking us outside of our like civilized home, where everything is ordered and organized and where our roles and our identities are very clearly defined. Getting out of this kind of rat cage essentially and into nature also gives us a space again to really practice self-reflection and to see what resonates with us, what we like, what we don't like. So, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people, like to take a walk through a forest if they're like confused or if they're overwhelmed with life, or like, spend time near the ocean, because nature in that way helps us get a clearer sense of ourselves, because we're kind of stepping outside the identity or like the mask that we usually wear. We have the luxury to take off this mask to a degree and thus see more clearly what is actually like, in front of us and going on inside of us and life.
Yeah. So I guess I have everything covered that we were talking about and writing about. So is there still something that you would like to talk about or express?
Yeah, I feel like I want to emphasize that, the point in life in general is not to be a specific gender or sexuality or any identity, but the point in life is always being yourself. And that therefore there's no point in trying to be, the perfect man or woman or whatever. Going inside and figuring out what really feels good to you, what resonates with you, is so much more valuable than trying to figure out how to fit outside. That can be like the next step. If you want to find yourself, always go inside first.
Yeah. Right. So to close the interview, um, what's what's up for you? What's next? And yeah, where can people find you?
Okay, so I have a website which is gwydionblackrose.com. Yeah, Gwydion, like Gwydion, I don't know, like look it up.
Yeah, I'll link it in the description.
Perfect. I also have a YouTube channel. I think there should be links to my YouTube channel on my website as well, but otherwise, like, yeah, people can usually find it. Just choose your favorite search engine and look up Gwydion Blackrose and you find like different places. What's coming up? Like Wildman Rising, the class that I talked about a little bit in the interview as well, will come up soon. I think we will start in July. And Wildman Rising it will be like the third time that I offer this class, which is really like an intense training program for men who really want to get to the core of what their own, masculinity is all about, who they are, what kind of men they want to be in the world. And it will really also include a lot of getting out into nature and figuring out how we are part of nature and how nature can help us to tune into the different aspects of ourselves to live the life and become the man that we want to be. So I'm really excited about offering that again. And yeah, I don't know, like everything is constantly evolving. I'm currently working like on another online class which will focus more on like spiritual self-care and taking care of your energy bodies and stuff like that. So yeah, people should just, stay tuned on my website or follow me on Facebook and they will get all the news.
Right, cool. I'm definitely excited to hear about your new class, and I'm really grateful for you doing that interview with me, and I had a lot of insights, so thank you.
Thank you. That was really fun. And yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.
Awesome. All right, so I wish you and everybody who's watching a beautiful day. And yeah, hope to see you guys and you soon sometime. Right. Bye.